In this video, we're going to hopefully finish the reverse engineering of a 1976 Fiat Fender model in Fusion 360. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to hopefully finish up this Fender scan. So we've spent about 2 hours to get to this point, and it's pretty close. There's not a whole lot left to do, but it's a lot of detail work. Now, as with the previous videos, you can go to the description of the video and you can download what you see on the screen here as a starting point, or you can go back to the beginning and make sure that you do finish your own models. Now, as I'm looking at this design, there is a small dip in the middle here. So you can kind of see it goes up and then down and up. And we've gone quite a bit of ways at this point, but that's something that we definitely want to fix. And we want to make sure that we do sort of smooth that out. You can kind of see that it bulges up a little bit right there. So we want to drop that down a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to address that. And I'm going to do this in box display. Now, when we look at box display, you can kind of see that this portion of the fender goes up, then down, then kind of goes up again. And on the inside portion where the hood is, you can see obviously it rolls down here, and it's going to be part of the car. But there are areas that we might want to tweak. So we're going to get started just making a few micro adjustments. And this is always going to be good practice for you. Again, it's not ideal when you have to make these micro adjustments, but it is something that you will want to get familiar with. So I'm going to select these two edges here. And actually, I'm going to grab this one as well. And I'm going to pull those up a little bit. And then I'm going to take a look at this in smooth display. And it looks like we still have a little bit of a raise there. Let's go ahead and take a look at this over the final. And it actually looks pretty good. It's a little high. You can see it's a little low in the front. It's probably a little high in here. So let's go ahead and make a couple more adjustments. So I want to take probably a couple edges here. And again, I'm going to box select. I'm going to pull those down just a bit. I'll box select here, pull those up just a little bit. And again, very minor adjustments, very micro adjustments. I'm going to use Control and 4 to get rid of the edge display. And now that looks a little bit better. It's not a drastic change, but before it was very apparent that it was going up, down, and back up. Now, obviously, these are the things that we could really spend a lot of time on. And if you missed the last video, some of the items like this, you can kind of see there's a graphics issue here where that face looks like it has some imperfections on it, and there's a couple down here. I mentioned that a lot of times those are really just graphics issues. In the forms environment, we can go to inspect and curvature map analysis, especially if you go to the principal maximum, you increase this value. If you don't see a red spot appear where those issues are, then likely it's going to be a graphics issue only. What we do want to see is that red line. That is going to be the radius or the edge that we're controlling. We want that to follow the line of the fender. So when we look at this from the right, you can kind of see that we've got that radius there. It's okay at the front, but you can kind of see it's a little bit high in the middle, and then it kind of drops down at the back. Now, again, we're looking at doing this for a race car. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be ideal. But if you want to play around with moving that, then you're going to have to get creative with moving these edges around. And again, you're going to want to do it in box display and make some adjustments. So before we move on to finishing off the front, I do want to make a couple little tweaks. I don't like the way that this pinches off right here. So I'm going to use insert point, and I want to just bring that up a little bit. And then I'm going to come all the way back to this edge. Then I'm going to double click this and get rid of it. And then I want to repeat that process. But again, I want to sort of smooth things out. It's going to be very minor, but even again, these little changes are going to make a big difference. And then over here, you can see that there's sort of a dip down. I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to go from here and come straight back. Double click on that. Again, pretty minor, but we're going to double check it in smooth display, Control 4 to get rid of edges. Make sure that we didn't do anything too drastic. You can see that it did raise that edge up a little bit. Everything still looks pretty good. It's a very minor detail. It looks like a hard crease when we look at it in the shadows, but when you look at it from the front, It's not very apparent. That's very minor, and that's what the scan looked like. So when we look at the scan, you can see that it is a very minor body line. It's not very, it's not very creased, or it's not very hard edged. But again, with the resolution of the scan, you can see a lot of waves in the fender. So we're going to have to kind of use our best guess and our best judgment on that stuff. All right. So now that we're pretty close, now is the time where we really need to get in and finish off the headlight. So I'm going to go back to box display, and when we take a look at the scan, again, we are going to sort of fill this gap in. We're not going to create this opening here because it's just going to be too hard for us to do in the forms environment. We will need to carry the headlight bucket around and connect back to this. And then this face here is going to come down and connect to this. We're probably going to have to put a division in the middle here to sort of bridge that gap. We'll kind of get there when we get there. So at this point, what we could do is we can either carry on taking this over, or we can decide to finish off the bottom. I think because we ended with this bottom section, I want to go ahead and just take care of it. There are a few sort of shape issues, like this section right here. That is obviously not ideal. It sort of bumps in. So I'm going to get started by trying to fix some of these edges. When we look at the scan, that area looks fairly smooth. It's a transition between the fender flare, and it sort of rolls under. It's very rounded. There's not a whole lot of shape to it. There's not a whole lot of defining edges. So we're going to have to just play around with the shape and see what we can see and try to get it right. And again, what I want to do is I want to work sort of in plane. And we can do this by inserting edges, or we can do this by manually moving these around. Manually moving them around is okay when you're trying to make minor adjustments, but when you're trying to make bigger adjustments, sometimes it's easier for us to use this insert point. I'm going to go from here, and I'm just going to draw a straight line all the way over to here, and then get rid of that other one. All right, and we're going to kind of do that same process. We're going to go back to insert point, and we'll do the same thing over here. And I'll probably just take it to this edge here because that one looks fairly straight from where we're going, and get rid of it. And you can already see that that kind of cleans it up a little bit. There's some inconsistencies and things that we need to take care of inside of there, but that really helped this area. It's a little bit smoother. So I'll do a quick check at the smooth display, and that looks pretty good so far. I'm pretty happy with that. So we'll go back to a box display, and now we'll kind of work on this area here. Again, I want to work in plane, so I'm going to go to the front and just take a look. You can see that these edges are gradually tapering to the side, which is good. When I look from the bottom, it is kind of messy. So what I want to see is I want to see these have a more gradual transition. So this is probably going to be back here. This one's going to be back here. And that is going to give us a better transition. This point likely will want to come out a bit. And again, what we're looking to see is that these edges are essentially parallel, or very gradually tapering, coming together, or tapering away from each other. If we have a very drastic difference, then it's going to usually lead to surface inconsistencies. So we want to try to make that as consistent as possible. And now we have to start to think about how this is going to connect to what we already have there. Now, some of this is going to be pretty straightforward. The vertex at the end here is going to attach here, and this one is likely going to go there, and this one might go here, but that leaves a bunch in the middle. So the way that I'm going to carry this on is I'm going to go to Modify, Weld Vertices, and remember the first selection is going to move to the second selection. So we're going to just try to pull these over, say OK, and then this one is now kind of behind there, and we're going to manually move it. So I need to find its endpoint and select it, and sort of bring this over. Now what we might find is that we have too many divisions, or we might not have enough. Now this edge is going all the way over the headlight. I need to keep it. This edge goes all the way up to the top of the fender. I need to keep it. And this one is defining the fender flare, the transition into the fender. So all of these are kind of important. So what this means is we might want to start dividing this up a bit more. And we can do that fairly easily. I'm going to take this edge, hit escape if you have anything selected. You want to make sure that you are starting fresh. I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to come down and just sort of wrap over for now. And then I'm going to get rid of this and this. I'll select them and delete it. Then I'm going to go to insert point and I'm going to carry this down to here. Then I'm going to select these two and delete them. And what that does is it lets me sort of add some additional divisions. So insert point, I'm going to go from here. I'm going to come straight down. Now I can do that one more time. I can divide this up and give me another point to attach to. It's not perfect, but again, we're just kind of working toward an end goal. We're working toward a shape, and we'll say okay. Again, it's not perfect, and actually let's do a Control-Z and undo. So I think I'm going to use weld vertices and just combine these two and completely end that, and then I can bring this one over here. Again, it gets me a little bit closer. That means I only need one division in here now. To do this, I'm going to use Insert Edge, and I want to select that one there and just put it right in the middle. And then I can use Insert Point and just sort of finish off down here, get it relatively close, and then we can use Weld Vertices and move that to that. I don't know how this is going to look, but let's go to Smooth Display and just take a quick look here. Control and 4 to hide the edges. And it's not too bad. It's not too bad. We need to do a little bit of work in this corner. But overall, that transition is probably relatively close to the actual. You can see that we're sort of bumped out a little bit. And again, the original Fender has sort of this pocket here, and it looks like it has a dent. So that flat spot that's there looks like it is a potential dent in the Fender. It's probably a little bit more rounded there. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm going to try to keep it as smooth as possible. So I'm going to go back to box display. And I want to begin to sort of work on and manipulate these shapes so that they are a bit smoother. From the side, it actually looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that result. I am going to pull this vertex out just a little bit and maybe pull this one back. Now, this is an area where using a program like Blender is a little bit better because we can take that vertex and we can actually slide it along the edges, and it helps keep the shape. When we're working in something like Fusion, we don't have that option. We can use slide edge, but we don't have a slide vertex. So let's go ahead and just manipulate these a little bit. These are going to be a little bit tricky. So as I pull this over, maybe pull this one over and this one back. And because we're working in plane, what we want to do is, again, try to keep these parallel with each other. So that way we're working on the manipulation of the shape in plane, and that's going to really help make sure that our curvature is nice at the end. So again, just making some minor adjustments from the bottom, trying to adjust the transition. This section looks a little flat, so I might pull it out a bit. And then this here, we've got sort of this bunching up effect that's happening. And that's probably not going to be very good, but let's look at it from the front. Double click the mouse wheel to fit to view. And from the front, it looks okay. Remember, we are going to have to divide this up, but we want to sort of hold off doing that until we're happy with the shape. So as we're looking at the shape, I can see that it's sort of bulged out here, and then this area looks very flat. So what I want to do is I want to take some of these edges, I'm just going to grab them, and from the front view, pull them out a little bit. I'm looking to have a very gradual transition here. Then I'm going to view this from the side, and that looks okay. I'm going to go to Smooth Display and kind of interrogate this, rotate it around, Control 4 to hide the edges, just see what the shadows are doing. So that looks pretty good. Again, this little corner, probably not ideal, so we're going to do a little bit more just in this corner, and that transition is pretty drastic there. It's going to be awkward to get to some of these because from the side it might look okay, but then when you start to manipulate it into different views, it doesn't look okay. And essentially what's happening is these three edges are in a straight line. So when we view them from the bottom, when we view them from the side, They're essentially in a straight line. And remember that straight line is not good for curvature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just begin to manipulate these a little bit and try to get away from that straight edge. I know it's looks kind of straight from here, but I'm just going to make these minor changes and then review the shape, see if it gets any better. So Control and 4 and kind of rotate this around. So again, probably a little bit more work that has to happen there. Since we have done a little bit, let's go ahead and save, make sure that we don't lose anything, and we can keep making changes. So once again, bring the edges back, and we'll bring these edges back. So what I want to do, we can kind of see this transition here where the fender flare is flared out, but then it changes here to where it sort of bumps out. So I'm going to try to maintain that by pulling this back in a little bit and pulling this one back in a little bit. Again, we want to make sure we don't have a flat section there, so I'm going to pull that back, Alt and 3. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually carrying the flare down a little farther than it was stock. So on the scan, it sort of disappears a bit sooner, kind of disappears right there. And what I'm doing is I'm carrying it down just a little bit further, just for a little bit more shape. Again, we don't have to worry too much about matching the original perfectly because it is going to be an aftermarket sort of shape and fender. So everything looks pretty good. I'm not 100% happy with that transition, but I also don't hate it. So I think in the interest of time, I will probably continue to make tiny tweaks, but nothing too major. So just make a few little adjustments here and there, and then we can move on to finishing the headlight area. So the headlight area is going to be tricky. Now there's not really going to be a great way around this, but the first thing I want to do is I want to insert an edge. I'm going to put this at minus 0.5 on the other side. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take this down to here. So when we look at the scan, we have this section here where it meets the lower part of the bumper and the opening, which again, we're going to cut out later, and then the fender here. Now, obviously, these transition, so the fender is here and then the bumper is here, and we're going to basically flare that piece out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use modify and bridge. I'm going to go from this one edge to this one edge here. I'm going to have one face between it. So when we take away the mesh, essentially what we're doing here is we're bridging those together. Now, if we just look at this in smooth display, it's not going to look very good just yet, and that's okay because we have to add a lot more detail. But essentially what we're doing is we're starting to connect those things. So the next step for me on something like this would be to build out the lip that goes around the headlight and then fill in any other details that we need. So I am going to take both of these edges and begin extruding them around. Another thing that we could do is we could make a cylinder and sort of keep the part that we need, because this is going to be tricky. You can kind of see that as we look at it from the front, it's going to be flat, but as we look at it from the side, that position is not necessarily going to be flat. You can kind of see this is where we need to get to. And when we look from the side with the scan, you can kind of see it comes down and starts to roll forward. So with those two edges selected, I'm going to pull them forward a little bit. I'm going to go back to a front, hold down Alt. And as I go, I'm going to rotate these a little bit because we are going to have to change directions. I'm going to view it from the side, pull it forward, go back to the front, hold down Alt, and again come over, rotate it a little bit, go to the side, and again pull it forward, go back to the front, and we're getting closer, and go ahead and rotate it. And let's hide the fender for a second and just take a quick look at smooth display. So not a horrible result, but we need to keep in mind that it is going to take some work to sort of fill this in. But at this stage, I'm going to go to weld vertices. I'm going to stick this one here, that one in the middle, and that one there. So we'll say okay to that. We'll see if it'll actually go to smooth display. Obviously, this is going to mess up the shape here. So we want to really focus our attention on box display and sort of building out the shape of that. So we're going to go to modify, going to select these two edges and rotate them a bit. Again, just like with the wheel arches, what we're looking to do is have that point to the center of our arc, which means that over here, we want to rotate those a bit, pull that down. And then if we look at this in smooth display, that should be a little bit rounder. Again, you can spend as little or as much time on this kind of stuff as you want, but working in box display is going to be your friend. Now, the Fender transitions pretty hard at this edge. You can see on the actual car, we're going to need more divisions here to sort of make that happen, because when we go to smooth display, that obviously it pulls it way back. We're not quite there yet, so you really want to make sure that everything looks okay in box display at this point and not worry too much about it in smooth display, at least not yet. But one thing we do want to make sure we think about is the fact that the lip that we're extruding, that lip was controlling that front face of the headlight bucket. And as we roll around this, we should really think what that is representing. Is there a flat face inside this area, or does that flat face sort of carry around? Now, I don't have a good idea of what's actually happening inside of there for this headlight bucket, so it's a little bit tricky for me to figure out. So I'm just going to do kind of, my best guess at what some of this is going to look like. So this, I'm actually going to rotate backwards a little bit, which is going to get tricky simply because of these edges here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these, I'm going to move the pivot point to the inside here, and I'm going to rotate those inside as well. And take a quick look in smooth display. Again, it's not going to be real great here, so we're not going to get a whole lot of information just yet, but it's always a good idea just to double check things as you go along to kind of decide if you're on the right path. So the next step for me is to start to try to connect everything together. And one of the big things that you need to look at when you're trying to connect everything together is where these edges are going to go. Now for me, this face is going to come straight down, which means I want to slide this edge over. So I'm going to go to modify, slide edge, and sort of pull it over a little bit. We're going to want to make sure that the shape is okay, but I'm going to add another edge. So before I worry too much about that, we're going to do 0.5 in the other direction. And as we start to look at this, what you should be picking up on at this point, as you get comfortable with doing forms, is that this point is going to go down to that. That'll work okay. This will go to here. That'll work okay. But over here, we don't have a quad. If we bring this down to this corner, we're going to have a triangle here, and it's going to be tricky for us because the triangle is always going to be flat, which means it's going to affect our curvature. So with that in mind, we likely want to insert another edge so that way we keep the quads. That's going to be the ideal situation. So I'm going to insert an edge. I want to double check the smooth display. I want to hide my edges, because remember, every time we insert edge with simple, it's going to create a flat section, and you can already see how it's affecting it. We've got these sort of flat areas, and those are going to be problematic. So what we're going to do is we're going to fix this before we move on. So from the bottom, all of those edges we just inserted are flat. So I'm going to double click on them and just start to give them a little bit of curvature. So just pull them out very slightly. Maybe take this one and pull it out and over just a little bit. This one and pull it out and over. And I am not too worried about the bottom. I will go back and fix that afterwards. Really all I'm concerned with at this point is this top section. So from the top, again, we want to make sure that those aren't truly flat, and you can really see how flat they are here. And also the opening for the headlight bucket here. So that is going to be tricky. I'm going to just pull that out a little bit. And I'm going to take this vertex and pull it out and pull this one out. So if you only can remember two things about forms, is one, you want to aim for four-sided faces, And two, if you have got flat sections between multiple faces or multiple edges, then those edges aren't doing anything. They're just going to give you bad geometry. So I'm going to double check the smooth display. Control 4. We still have that sort of crease there. I'm going to go to make uniform. Going to go to box display and back to smooth display, and you can see that it kind of fixed that area for us a little bit. And again, the reason for that is because when we use make uniform, it's taking our nice, more uniform layout in box display, and it's taking the smooth display and pushing it closer to that. We're still going to need to do a little bit of work here, but it is a little bit better. All right, let's do a quick save. It's always good to save. And then we are going to use modify and edit form. And I want to take this edge and I'm just going to begin to pull it down. And then I am going to weld vertices. So I'm going to go from here to here. Actually, we could also use bridge. Bridge will be fine. But I'm going to use weld vertices from there to there and say OK. If you want to use the bridge tool, remember you can use multiple edges. So we could do 2 there. And we can do 2 here. By default, it's always going to put 3 faces. I always want to go back to 1. I like to use 1 because I want to go back and I want to control where those edges end up. And for this one, this 4 side, we can just use fill hole and take care of all that. So quick check. We're going to do control 4. And not perfect because we need to tighten this up, but it actually looks surprisingly pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that. And now we can take care of this corner. So control 6 to bring those back. 1, let's show the fender. And essentially what we need to do is we need to insert another edge to carry this down. Now, the reason that this is going to start to get complicated is because that edge needs to carry into here. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to, but generally you want it to. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just make a couple little tweaks before we move on. I'm going to pull this out just a little bit, just because it was very flat. This edge could probably slide over. We can fix that in just a little bit. But I just want to just maybe rotate some of these around. So take these 2 edges and maybe rotate them back a little bit. Pull them back in. Take these 2 edges here and maybe rotate those back, pull them in a little bit. And this one back here is probably okay. So again, you can always go back and forth between smooth and box display. Just do some checks. Make sure that you're on the right path. That looks okay. And remember, we've got these star points, and we really want those star points to be away from any of our drastic changes in curvature. So what I want to do is I'm going to try to use insert point, and I'm going to just come from here to here. See that this is going to make a triangle, which is going to be problematic if I do it here. So in order for that not to be a triangle, I'm going to come up to this edge. I'm going to say insert edge. And I'm going to pull that one down and relatively close. When we take a look at that in smooth display, you can see now we've tightened up that corner. That star point is away from the drastic transition there. And this is now a little bit closer to that shape. Again, it's not perfect. I'm not necessarily going for perfect here. Again, I wanted to get it close. I want it to look right. And I want it to have good geometry. And those are my main concerns. Making sure that it matches the rest of the car is obviously important. So that is a big consideration. But again, so this area is where the hood is. And then we're going to trim away the rest of this. So as long as we're relatively close here, that's going to be okay. Now, for a fiberglass fender for a race car, generally you are not going to put metal bumpers on the front of them. Probably be a fiberglass bar in the center as well. So if you are designing multiple pieces, then obviously you can make them fit however you want. But that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. What we can do is we can slide some of these edges down. So if we hide the mesh, we can potentially take that edge and we can try to slide it. It doesn't generally work very good with something like this, but we can pull it down just a little bit, which will it'll it'll make that transition a little bit more gradual. So again, it looks pretty good. And then we can take care of some of the inside details. So again, on the scan, we've got sort of this area where it goes back to the headlight bucket. It is going to be tricky for us to do something like that, but we're going to try to do an extrude. So we already have it rolling in, so I'm going to hold down Alt and just pull it straight back. And then I want to scale this in the horizontal direction until it's flat. Then I'm going to pull it back forward a bit. And I want to put it about where the headlight bucket would be. Now again, if this is a race car, probably not going to have a traditional headlight, so you can kind of play around with what that shape needs to be. When we look at the scan, you can see that that comes in and it kind of stays in the same position over here. So the way that we do that is we set the pivot over here and then we scale it horizontally and it'll bring that in. Now it's not perfectly round. We're going to have to do some work there. But again, it just kind of gets us a little bit closer. If I hide the mesh, you can kind of see what we're doing. We can scale it vertically a little bit and kind of put it where it needs to be. But that looks pretty good, and it's relatively flat in the back. So it's it's about where a flat headlight section would be. At this point, let's do another quick save, make sure we don't lose anything, and then we can kind of work on getting this a little bit more round. All right, so let's put this thing back in box display, take a look at it from the front. And we want to try to make this a little bit more round. Now, I mentioned before that we have tools like Cylindrify. These are going to work on faces. So if you use something like this, you have to be careful because it's going to start to affect this other geometry here. So if you want to use something like Cylindrify, I suggest that you double click on an edge, you insert another edge forward, so that way you have this loop of faces. So we can go ahead and we can try that tool now. I'm going to go ahead and select these as I go around. Now, what's going to happen as we go around, it's going to try to turn these into a cylinder based on the selection. I honestly, I haven't had great luck with it on something like this. So while it does work, this is obviously not a result that we want. So I'm going to hit cancel and I'm going to do this manually. So using modify and edit form, what we're looking for here is again, somewhat of a consistent transition. And because we have these tight edges down here, it gets a little tricky. We know this stuff over here is relatively close to round. It's not perfect, but it is relatively close. So what we can do is we can kind of play around with where these points are and hop back and forth between box display and smooth display and just see if we're close. And there is a big difference in size or the distance between edges here. So you can always pull things around and do things a little bit more drastic just to see if we can get a little bit closer. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm going to sort of pull these in. Now, obviously, if you're making a fiberglass part off of this, you're probably going to end up with a flat face here. So it's going to be a flat face in the mold, and then you would just cut out afterwards, or it would be close to a flat face and you'd have a lip there. I'm going to take a look at this. Pretty close, not too bad, but not perfect. I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to double click on that edge we inserted. I'm going to delete it and go back to box display and just do a little bit more work on this. Getting rid of that edge means that I can pull these around a little bit more freely. I'm going to go ahead, move these over. One thing you'll notice that I'm doing is I am sort of pulling some of these over that were kind of twisted to the side. I'm kind of not only just moving them inward, but I'm kind of moving their position a little bit. This one I'm going to point up, and this one I'm going to sort of change its position and point it up. And then this one point down, because essentially this is our crease, and what we're trying to do is get rid of that crease and make something a little bit more round. And I'm going to go to box display and back to smooth display. Not perfectly round, but honestly, that's pretty darn close. I'm okay with that. I could sit here and I could spend probably a whole hour just tweaking that. And, you know, if this is a part that you're making, you might want to invest that time, but I don't think anybody really wants to sit here for an hour watching me do that. So I'm not going to make any more adjustments, even though, you know, sort of my OCD really wants me to. But now I want to come back and go back and sort of fix some of this stuff. Now, I have mentioned several times that manually moving around these vertices is not the best workflow. Generally, what you want to do is you want to move these around by rotating and scaling edges, and you also want to insert new edges to divide them up. And moving these around kind of manually like this is it's going to be opening yourself up for surface inconsistencies. If you do it carefully, you can get good results. But if you just come in and you start moving things around, you're going to end up with little waves in the surface, and those are going to be kind of hard to correct. You can kind of see what I'm talking about here. You see how there's like a little bit of a wave here. So in order to fix kind of stuff like that, you really want to see a consistent transition in the box display. So when we view this from the front, I'm going to rotate this around. When we view this from the front, really what we want to see is sort of a straight line here. And what I can do is delete some of these edges. So like these edges back here, I can delete some of them and repatch them. So for example, if I go to insert point and I draw a straight line from here to here, and I double click on this, that allows me to get a good clean edge there. We can also, you know, select some of these, delete them, which allows some of the other geometry to kind of fix itself. I don't want to say fix itself, but it will go into sort of a state of least resistance. And then when we go back and we put that edge back in there, it can kind of help it smooth out. You can see it's still not perfect. It still needs work because that inside edge is not great. And that you can kind of see that little bump that's happening there. Some of that stuff you can use tools like flatten, and flatten will kind of average out the distance between those edges. But this is kind of what happens when you insert too many edges before you've got your shape kind of down. So having those in there can kind of have that effect. Another way that we can kind of get around this is by selecting these edges that we're having problems with and deleting them. And then we can come back, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take these and I'm going to go to let's go to the left side view. I'm going to hold down Alt and bring those back and try to keep them in line. And then I will do a bridge. So we'll bridge from maybe this edge down to that edge with just one face. And then take a look. So that should be a little bit better. We still have a little bump where it rolls around the corner, but that's going to just kind of be part of it. So far so good. Looks pretty good. Again, we're not going to worry about that sort of indentation where a marker light or a fog light would have been. So let's do a quick save. Don't want to lose anything. The last bit of this that I want to talk about, I think everything in terms of the shape, the overall quality of the surface, the headlight opening, the bucket, all that stuff is pretty good. But the last thing I want to talk about is like dealing with this lip for the fender. Obviously, when you're making a fiberglass part, you're going to have seams and edges and lips. So I'm going to try that on here. Oftentimes it creates a problem for us. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the side. I'm going to hold down Alt and Control, which will allow us to create an extrusion with a crease. And I'm going to scale it down. And then you'll notice that it really pulls it forward. So what I'm going to do is reset my pivot point to something like over here. And then I'm going to scale that back until that back edge is essentially vertical. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then we have to worry about things like this corner or this edge right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these faces and delete them. And I'm going to delete that. And then this stuff you can go back and sort of manually fix these corners. So in smooth display, that crease should mean, Now, I say should because it doesn't always happen. Should mean that we didn't really affect any of the curvature. We should have kept the rest of that surface okay. But obviously down here where it doesn't connect, that is a problem that we need to fix. So box display, because we got these two edges here, that is going to be a little bit trickier. So the way that we're probably going to fix that is going to modify insert edge, and we'll sort of put one in the middle, and then we might add a second one just kind of halfway. So what that means is this can connect here, and the other ones can sort of make themselves fit. So I'm going to take this down to here. I'll take this to there, and that to there. All right. So now that crease has carried itself to here, and you can kind of see what's going to start to happen. It's going to be problematic because of how smooth of a transition everything else had. So that crease could be a problem. We could get rid of it. We can go to modify and uncrease. But what you're going to find is when you uncrease, you're going to have this smooth rollover, and you're going to want to take that edge and you're going to want to insert another edge relatively close to it, probably on the other side, to get more of a soft transition, but a true crease. So if we hide the edges, Control and 4, it's not a complete hard edge, but it is relatively close, and the rest of the curvature should be okay. And it rolls under, but you will see that it did cause problems down here. So these are all things that are going to affect the overall shape. You can see that we didn't carry it down to the bottom. It sort of faded away. And ultimately what would probably happen is that needs to be carried back here, and we would have a hard transition wherever this goes into whatever the front bumper is going to look like. And I don't have that information, so I don't know what that's going to look like. But let's go ahead and maybe bring this edge to here and tighten that up. So again, at this point now we're using these T-points that are sort of ending in the middle of another edge, because this is not major curvature. This is not in the middle of a big face. I'm not really worried about what's going to happen there, but it allows me to sort of tighten up those corners. If I do Control 4, you can see it allows me to tighten up those corners. This is not good because it does have some influence on the rest of the shape. It would need a little bit more work. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that result. So at this point, I think, we've been doing this for, at this point, almost 3 hours. I think that's probably enough information to replicate pretty much any Fender. Obviously, as I mentioned, this is not a short process. This is not like a 10-minute thing. You really need to spend a lot of time. This Fender, I know it's taken us about 3 hours to do with me narrating it. If I were to just go in without talking and to go through and do this, it would probably be around an hour of time to get to the point where we're at now. Now, if I was making this for my own car, it's very possible I could spend another 10 hours doing little tweaks and finalizing things and just sort of adjusting the shape. It's not my car, so I don't want to do that because obviously I don't have all the other resources. I don't have the other parts of the car. I don't know what the end goal is going to be in terms of the shape. It's obviously not going to be exactly like this, because if you're making a custom part, you probably want to customize it a little bit, maybe brake ducts or fog lights, or do something with the headlight area, make it a little bit wider for wider tires. So there's all those sorts of little things that are going to go into it. But overall, I think this is a really good result. If you have any questions, please let me know. You can always email me, support@caducator.com. You can leave comments in the video. I would really like to know if anybody has done this before. Has anybody taken sort of a hobbyist scan and tried to recreate a part like this, a Fender, specifically using Fusion 360, but really using anything? And what were your results? Did you have good results? Did you make the part? Did you have any pain points? If you did, what were those pain points? Now, obviously, I've covered forms probably every which way that we can think of, but I'm never surprised. There's always an email or a comment or somebody trying to do something just a little bit different. And there's always a surprise because there's always a little difference in the approach or how you use the tool or maybe the thought process behind it. So even though all the information is out there, we've modeled several different cars, we've modeled different car parts, we've looked at essentially forms in many different ways. There's still always a little piece of that puzzle that's missing. So if you're one of those people that's tried to use this, if you've gone down the path and you've run into an issue on a certain project, please let me know. I'm happy to give more information and attempt it. I do have a couple other things in the works that are not car related using forms, so I do plan to cover those in some future videos. But at this point, I think we can call the Fender done. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.